To another exciting day of mathematics. Whoop, whoop. Warm up 25 is on the screen. That shouldn't take you long. It's only 5 data. Find the standard deviation and sketch a bell curve. And today we're moving on. We're adding a couple more things to what we started on Tuesday. And Monday. And just give me a heads up, it's still more concepts, so hopefully you'll absorb those as much as possible, so stay focused, and let's get started. Go. All right, here goes one from one of your colleagues on your screen. Double check your work. Try to go to the second decimal most of the time, which is the 100th place, please. By the looks of it, they got standard deviation 1.4, which goes up to 1.49, which some of you rounded to 1.5. So like I said, let's try to keep it to second decimal. Please, pretty please. The mean was 5.6, and so on and so forth. All right. Copy the agenda, please. Warm-up number 25. Today we're moving on with the observational experimental studies. Now, I'm giving you a heads up. Today's a little challenging in the sense that we're going to continue adding more concepts within those concepts. We're moving a little bit away from the crunching of numbers and computation just to understand certain things that need to be in place. Okay? So everybody look up really quick. Go like this really quick. Bear with me because we're about to endure a couple of concepts within concepts. We just need to make sure we understand those. So tonight's home play is only one problem. So after that, get a Cornell note ready, please. I'll give you some time. Go. Also, to have access to the home play for tonight, write down A as an apple, 8, L, B, M, A, 8, LBM, A8, LBM. That gives you access to the home plate tonight. All right? And check this out. This is what it's going to look like. Ready? Woo-wee. Let's go. It's one problem. Look at it. Essay, no. All right, here we go. I can identify statistical studies. I can identify statistical studies. So as I mentioned before, I've been chunking these portions out because, like I said, if we were to go at a college level speed, it would have been a lot of things in one lesson, and that's a little bit too much. That's why some people burn out really fast. But I'm giving you everything one step at a time, and we've been observing it little by little. So think about the statistical studies that we introduced on Monday. I sat over there by the airport. I did a study as to people keeping the speed limit from Dairy Queen all the way to Imperial, which is 45 miles per hour. I wrote down my conclusions, didn't like it, went back, did another study, and then this time I actually had my police friends bring a unit, turn on their lights, and again recorded stuff and come with a conclusion. So, talk to your neighbor, which are the two studies that I did that day? Talk to your neighbor, see if they remember. What were the two studies that I did? What are they called? Two studies. All right, looks like Alessandra's got it. Very good. Amelia, of course. Lourdes, all right. Austin's got it. Very good. Cole, of course. Well, let's go with Mario. What are the two studies that I did? Observational and experimental. Everybody got those? Yes? And, of course, we know what statistics are. So observational and experimental. So Write this again, write statistical studies, write observational and experimental. I'm going to add a couple more things, and here's where it starts getting a little bit more challenging for you to remember the different types of studies that there are. They're observational, but they have different studies, experimental, and they're called different studies. So that's all it is. Ready? Here it goes. Observational. There are three most common observational studies. Look up to the screen. The first one, known as cross-sectional. Cross-sectional. What is that, Mr. Q? Well, when you go back to a single point in time, take a snapshot of that time and do a study on it. Now, it's observational because you can't manipulate it. All you're going to do is take notes of what you see or you remember of that time. For example, let me take you guys back in time. Let's see. Y'all ready? Watch. I'm going to give you a specific date. March 16, 2020. What happened that day? Oh, that day, the school district emailed all parents and students to let you know that you were going to stay home and do distant learning. So, if I was to think back to that point in time, that's what we call a cross-sectional study, and I'm going to do a little observation as to what I remember from that time of my students and how I interacted with my students. Let's see, not you guys, my students. I would be like, okay, the warm-up, what you get for your standard deviation, Alessandra. Crickets. 15 seconds later. Oh, sorry, Mr. Q, my mic's not working. Okay. And then, how come your camera's not on? Oh, my camera's not working either. Okay, my goodness. So you guys got really good at lying during that time. So that would be a cross-sectional study of people using all the excuses possible to be in the bathroom or gaming while being in class. All right, that's what we call cross-sectional. Let me give you another one. The second most common observational study is known as retrospective. Retrospective, write that down. Now, what's different from that one to cross-sectional? Retrospective, we need actually past records to do the study. For example, if I was to go back in time to 1993, NBA Finals with Michael Jordan, and I wanted to find out the average scoring for each of the players, I can go to the records. Is that correct? Past records, they're recorded, and that would be my observational study, but it's called retrospective. Pretty simple. Once again, cross-sectional, retrospective. And the third one, write this down. The third one's known as longitudinal. Longitudinal is an actual study, observational study, just like the one that I did the other day at the airport, where I needed to spend time, a time period, recording that observation. I actually need to live it over a time period. Pretty straightforward? All right, so before we move on, talk to your neighbor, let them know the difference between cross-sectional, retrospective, and longitudinal study. Those are all observational. Talk to your neighbor, please. Difference from one to the other. All right? And once again, all these three are observational. Now, what are the advantages of all these three? Advantages. It's usually done in a natural setting, so it's done by observing in any place. You cannot manipulate the outcome. You actually just observe and record. There are special circumstances to take in consideration, but those happen within that observation. However, there are disadvantages. First one, you cannot show cause and effect. Once again, why not? Because you're only observing and recording data from the observation. It's expensive and time consuming. Like me, guys, if I was to go and do a study, if somebody asked me to do a study, I'll say, I'll charge you $300 an hour. Because that's how much I think my time is worth. So it would be expensive and time consuming. There's inaccuracies at times by certain things that happen in the study that you observe, but you have to record them because you cannot change certain things that you see. You're just recording from observation. So, observational, 3 most common, we got those. Let's go to experimental. I'll give you guys a little bit more time to finish writing the other side. All right, so once again, from the other day, we said that the observational study that I did is when I just recorded the speeds and the cars and the vehicles at their speed, whatever speed they were coming. Did I have anything to do with the outcome? No. Experimental is when something is introduced to create a change in the outcome. So let's go to experimental. So now that you switch your noodle to experimental, we know that, once again, it's experimental because something's introduced to create change. However, there's 2 most common experimental studies. The first one is known as scientific. Whenever you do an experimental study, the scientific experimental study is the one that you pick groups or subjects at random. You pick groups or subjects at random. Who picks? You pick them. And the second type of experimental study is known as quasi-experimental study. So question, if scientific, you pick them at random, what do you think a quasi-experimental is? Yeah, you don't pick them. Those are intact groups. They give you the groups already. They give you the subjects and the groups that you're going to study. So once again, scientific, you pick at random. Quasi-experimental is intact for subjects and groups. Basically, you don't have anything to do with the groups or the subjects that are going to be studied for that experimental study. Advantages. Well, you can manipulate the variables. This is, remember when I introduced the police unit in the back of the lights, I manipulated the outcome by introducing that variable for people to slow down. Second, you can measure cause and effect. You can measure cause and effect. So the other day when people were actually abiding by the speed limit, what was the cause? The police. What was the effect? Slowing down to the speed limit. Also, advantage, it's a smaller and shorter study. Smaller, you can go with a sample, and shorter, not that lengthy in time versus the observation. Disadvantages. It's still expensive and time consuming because if somebody asks me once again to do an experimental study, I'm going to charge them. Usually not in a natural setting. So experimental, even though I did one that day experimental, most of those experimental studies are done inside a place where it's a controlled environment. Also, what that brings with disadvantages is sometimes there's unethical practices. There's some studies that people do where not a lot of people are allowed to see what goes on inside that become unethical. Such as, let's say somebody did a study in how people control their pain. Whoa, what if some of the people that are scientists, they're like, well, we're going to break people's wrists to measure the pain. That's unethical because you're harming people. And last but not least, many times people bring in their personal biases. What is that, Mr. Q? Many times what we have in our mind that we think is right, and we don't take into consideration all the policies and protocols that are in place, we bring in biases that might skew our study, okay? All right, here goes the most important part of the next section. Utensils down, look up to the screen. Experimental studies. So, there's going to be two groups. One called the treatment. You're just paying attention. The treatment group is a group that we actually give the variable so they can be manipulated. Whereas, there's a control group that is not given or does not receive any variable. For example, the day that I went to observe that I put the police vehicle behind me, the 8 people that slowed down, guess what? That's called a what? The treatment group, because they were changing their behavior according to the police. However, how about the 2 that just drove at speed limit? That's a control group because it doesn't matter who's there or not. They do protocol. They follow speed limit. All right. So, let's talk about variables. Look up, please. Independent variable is the one you introduce to see if it creates a response. So, think about it. What was the independent variable that I introduced that day to see if it created a response? The police, right? All right. Dependent variable. This one we haven't talked about. This is new. But it's introduced to measure the outcome. Something that is introduced to measure the outcome. Think about it. Haven't given you anything like that yet, but it's introduced to measure the outcome. And lastly, one more variable, confounding variable. It's a variable or something outside of the study that might affect the response of the group. And you're like, I don't understand, Mr. Q. Okay, but we'll get there. I'll come back to this one so you can copy this afterwards. Let me get to the example. Look up, please. Here we go. We're going to start with question number 1. Look up, please. You guys are going to help me to make sure we understand what we just went through. Here it goes. And it reads, question number 1, what kind of study was this? Let me start reading the study. It says, research randomly assigned 10 people to 3 different groups. Think about it. Researchers randomly assigned 10 people to 3 different groups. Talk to your neighbor, let them know what kind of study this is. Be specific and tell them why. What kind of study and why? What kind of study and why? Looks like Carter's got it. Very good, Carter. What do you think, Carter? Close. It says researchers randomly assigned 10 people to 3 different groups. Aaron, what do you think? Experimental. I agree with that. However, what kind of experimental? There's 2 types. Talk with your neighbor. Which kind is that? And tell them why you say that. Let's see, Vianney, what kind? Scientific, why do you say that? That is correct. When you randomly select, it's a scientific experimental study. So far, so good? Yes, Mr. Q. All right, let me continue reading. It says, Group 1 was instructed to write an essay about hassle of life. Group 2 was instructed to write an essay about circumstances that made them feel thankful. Group 3 was instructed to write an essay about events they felt neutral. Question, what is the independent variable? Which means, what was introduced to make them change or make them act upon that? Tell your neighbor, what would be our independent variable? All right, looks like Aleshka's got it. Very good. Let's go with Melina. The essay type, that is correct. Essay about hassle, essay about feeling thankful, and essay about neutral events. Yes, that's our independent variable. Now, here goes one that's new. What is the dependent variable? What is introduced that we can actually measure an outcome? Finish reading the problem. Talk to your neighbor. Let them know what is introduced that can help us measure an outcome. All right. Looks like Santi's got it, but let's go with Alessandra. What is our dependent variable? The questionnaire, that is correct. Do you think we can measure with a questionnaire whether they change their mind according to the essay? Yes, that is our dependent variable, questionnaire. All right, continue. Confounding variable. We said a confounding variable, pay attention to this one, because once again, this is new, is a variable that can affect the study that is not found immediately in here, but it could be affecting the way people respond to the study. So think about it. What could affect the people writing the essay the way they respond? What do you think it could be? Talk it over your neighbor. What do you think would affect the way they respond? Once again, it's not found in there. It's something outside of there. What do you think can affect that? Cole, go. Okay. Mario, what do you think? What can affect the outcome? Something that's not there, but what would affect the way they respond? Samuel, help him out. Background. Somebody's background. Do you think somebody's background will affect the way they respond to the essay? Yes, that's a confounding variable. What else could be a confounding variable? Austin. T. Let me ask you this. If somebody had you write an essay, what would affect you the way you respond to the essay, aside from your background? Austin S., what do you think? What's that? Bad day, also known as what? Mental health. That is correct. Mental health. Yeah, that's also a confounding variable that sometimes we don't think about and affects studies. One more that probably none of my students, but some people that are on drugs affects the way they perform in studies. All those are what? Confounding variables. Are we there so far? All right. Go to part E. What can you say about the sample size? It says, researcher randomly assigned 10 people to 3 different groups. 10 people, 3 different groups. Talk to the neighbor. What do you think about the sample size? Is that good? If it's not, what do you think would be the change? Talk it over to your neighbor. Let's see. Santi, what do you think? Not even. Okay, so what would he do? 9 people instead of 10. So not even, but have 9, which divided by 3 would give us 3, 3, and 3. Is that enough people to come out with an outcome for a study? Kind of. I would like to have maybe more, maybe 10, 10, and 10, or something like that, you know. Like if I was to split up this class into 3 different groups, does that make sense? So, lastly, the conclusion, it reads, focusing on positive makes you more optimistic about life in general. But let's look at the essays. One of them talks about the hassles of life. The other one talks about feeling thankful. So hassles, thankful. And the other one talks about being neutral. Does the conclusion fit the study? And if not, how would you change the conclusion? Talk to your neighbor. Does the conclusion fit the study? And if not, how would you change that conclusion? All right, looks like Cole's got it. Very good, Cole. Logan. Austin T's got it. Very good. But let's go with Brandon Daugherty. Does the conclusion that they come up with match the study? It does? Why do you say that? Okay. Araceli, what do you think? Does it match the study? No. Why not? Well, one of them is hassles, that's a negative. One of them is neutral, it's not positive or negative. And there's only one group with maybe being thankful being a positive thing. And they're qualifying everybody under that one. So how would you change the outcome of all the study? What would you write for an outcome? Talk to your neighbor, let them know what the outcome would be, and I'm going to get that statement from someone, maybe Brandon Daugherty. All right, how would you change the outcome? It's like Alexa's got it. Very good, Alexa. All right. All right, Brandon, give us a new conclusion. That's me. I would say people's outcome in life depends on each personal point of view. Does that encompass all 3 different ones? Positive, negative, and neutral? Yeah? That's the conclusion. So I'm going to give you one for home plate where you read the entire thing. I'm going to give it to you ahead of time. You're going to have close to 20 minutes to finish it. And you're going to answer those questions just like we did here. So talk it over to your neighbor, get together with someone to help them out. There it is on the screen. I'll send it to your screen. The rest of you that are following on YouTube, I'm going to stop the video here, but with the code that you got, go back, make sure you take notes on the independent and dependent variables that I gave you earlier, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.